Austin West. Thanks for coming on the show.
Good to be here, brother.
So I've been going over your website in preparation for this recording, and I really resonated with a lot of the stuff on there. One kind of phrase that really stood out to me was men are trapped in cycles of addiction, numbing, and empty success while their lives slip away. Why do you think so many men are struggling with purpose and meaning these days?
It's the world we grew up in, man. You know, it's like the culture and societies, not just here in the US, but much of the rest of the world, have taught us that success should look a certain way. It should be a certain way. It should feel a certain way. And for the last few generations at least, we've chased that. And most of us have come to find that that's actually not the answer. And I just want to double click on a word real quick, and that is addiction. And this is something that I was very resistant to admitting to myself for so many years because I was functional, right? You know, it's like for 16 years of my life, I made a shit ton of money. I had great friends. I had a fun, quote unquote, life. And so I wasn't able to actually see that much of my life was just trading one addiction for the next. And until men are able to confront that aspect of themselves and see the ways that they're numbing and distracting, we're almost not able to find really what the purpose is and what the success we're seeking is in the first place.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, so I've been sober for coming up to a year and a week, and I was just about to release a blog that I wrote, regarding, I guess, a year of sobriety and reflecting on. I don't know. One of the big things for me was, I guess, not being able to admit it while I was in it. There was a deep shame attached to it. Especially I thought if I was admitting that I had a problem, that I was admitting that I was weak, and that I was admitting that I guess there was some taboo around admitting that if I was admitting that I had a problem, I was admitting that I was a full-blown alcoholic, which I wasn't the case. I had a bit of a unique issue with drugs and alcohol. I suppose I want to zoom in or question, what exactly do you mean by the word addiction?
I like Peter Crone's definition of addiction. I don't know if you're familiar with Peter Crone's work, but he says addiction is just doing a whole lot of something that almost never works, right? Like it gets us to just the point where we believe it's giving us what we need, but it doesn't. And so we continue to go back to that thing over and over again. And for me, let me back up again. It's like when I compare my journey to my oldest brother, he was an addict as well. 14 years, ended up in and out of rehab 3 times, couple relapses, right? Like really, really in that journey. AA, what most people, I believe, think of when they think of addiction. I graduated top of my class. I was top 3% in sales in every industry I worked in. I made $500,000 a year, right? But I was still suffering at the same level that he was. I was just masking it with different things. And so it's like when I would do coke on the weekends, that was just being replaced with my Adderall addiction Monday through Friday, right? We could do those swaps of pretty much anything. My alcoholism Friday through Sunday was replaced with my 16-hour work days, Monday through Thursday, right? And so addiction is just, in my opinion, it's a little bit more verbose than how it's looked at currently. To me, it's the distracting and numbing mechanisms that taking us away from the remembered self that holds our purpose, that holds the vision, that holds our mission for what it is to be a man and walk through this life. And to zoom in on something else, it's like the fear of admittance because of all those stories that we end up telling ourselves of who am I if I admit this, right? Like, if we peel this back to what I believe is the ultimate wound of the man, is I am not enough. And so who am I actually confirming about myself if my ego allows me to even admit that in fact I am not enough, but from the point of a lie through the confirmation, right? And it's a little confusing in there, but it's like if I were to admit that, It's like admitting the greater story that keeps men trapped where they are in the first place. But really what it's doing is it's actually presenting that shadow from being seen in a way that I can do something with it now. I can integrate that. I can look at it. I can speak to it because nobody is holding that over me because I came to the admittance of myself. And yeah, just that phrase you said, it's like the admittance is obviously one of the hardest things there. And addiction can look many ways, man. I almost think like the word needs to be replaced with something else because it's so charged. But still, at the end of the day, that's what we're doing. We're distracting and numbing from life.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, addiction, the word itself is very charged. And I think because of, I guess, the taboo around it, or, I mean, I don't really like to say, I had an addiction, because I feel like it just comes with a whole bunch of other, I don't know, connotations. So I usually just say, look, I had a problem. I think addiction, like the way I've always seen it, is like short-term hedonism or escapism, even though there's going to be and continuing that behavior, even though there's going to be long-term consequences or even short-term consequences, right? Like it's negatively affecting your life, but you continue to do so. Yeah, so I guess I want to talk more about meaning and purpose, and it's something that I really struggled with, and I think for the majority of my life, I think a lot of my the I am not enough thing, like that was huge for me, and I think that was a massive issue all the way through my 20s. And I think the only way to numb that, was drinking and alcohol, and I guess continuously moving the goalpost for success, right? Like there was this thing where it's like I thought that I would be okay and happy once my business reached a certain size, or once I'd proved to the world that I can, run a marathon or an Ironman, right? But the second I'd do that, nothing changed. And I was, I guess, I was trying to do the same thing again. Okay, well, if my business does X amount of revenue, then I'll finally be happy. But nothing ever changes, right? So, what's the antidote? I mean, what's the other method to happiness other than continuously trying to achieve success?
Yeah, it is finding the purpose. Like if we go back to that masculine dynamic real quick, kind of breaking that down into masculine and feminine archetypes, right? I believe that the masculine seeks two primary things in this life: freedom and purpose. I believe the feminine seeks two primary things in this life, and that's connection and safety, right? And so if we look at, and we have both of those archetypes within us, but obviously being men in these world, we're a little bit more in line, and one's going to be a little bit louder. And I think what has really catapulted men into so many disruptive behaviors and distractions and numbing mechanisms and addictions and depression rates and suicidality, all of the pretty abhorrent things we see happening to men in the world today, is that removal from what our innate purpose and gift is in this life. Most men find themselves spending 40, 50, 60 hours a week fueling somebody else's mission, which is in service to nothing. For my journey, I was in finance for 12 years. So I spent 50, 60 hours a week in JP Morgan, BlackRock, right? Some of the biggest devils there are, draining my life force away to manipulate fake numbers on a screen against something I really didn't give a shit about. And then I wondered why I was depressed, right? I believe that we all come into this world with some sort of innate gift, purpose, alignment, and vision for ourselves. And through our primary system, through the way culture and society is set up, those things are beaten out of us, right? It's trained out of us. We're told to get in line, fit in line, don't ask questions, graduate, and you're going to get blessed to do one of these things that typically aren't valuable to the world in many ways. There's a lot of conversation, especially in the men's workspace, about people helping you find your purpose. I don't think that's what the goal is. I think our purpose is innate. It's within us, and we already know what it is at some level. I called this version of ourself the remembered self. The problem is most of us are living life through the lens of our distorted self. And a good visual to give people is imagine you're looking at yourself through a shattered mirror. You're still seeing the same being, but how does that actually reflect back to you? Right? And the one doing the looking is already whole. Everything we want as men is available to us now, like actually right now, because the present is all that exists. Now, what we look at through that shattered mirror is the distorted self. That's ridden with our traumas, our stories, our belief systems, our cultural programming, religious programming, parental programming, whatever it might be, that has us living life out of alignment to who we really are. And so the way to find your way back to your purpose is start clearing all the distortions. Learn what you believe and why you believe it. Start questioning the way you live your life, bringing awareness to your patterns and your belief systems and your thoughts and your behaviors, right? Start paying attention to the inventories environments you find yourself in, rather. Understanding that everything in my life is a mirror of self. And so this practice of getting back to what our purpose is, the one thing I tell my guys most is like, you'll start to feel it and whiff it when you feel yourself being in service to something greater than you. That's when you know you're on the right path. That's when you know you're in alignment towards discovering what your purpose is. And it's not that we can't support other people's big missions and visions, right? Like my purpose in this life may be to use my gift of understanding and relating to the language of technology to help somebody else fulfill their mission on a greater level that I also believe in and support, right? It's just about coming back to the self, clearing the shit in the way of us actually tuning into what's already there waiting for us to rediscover, and then looking for the breadcrumbs along the way. You know, Carl Jung called these synchronicity. I like to refer to these things as, this is more of a law of one teaching, a really powerful spiritual text I read, and it talks about being in service to other as another way that you'll start to find that alignment of coming back to your purpose. So it's in all of us, man. Every single man walking around this world has something that they are designed to do. And it's less about trying to find what that is and more about just clearing the shit that you already hear the whispers. There's something in you that knows the stuff you should stop engaging in, the people you should stop hanging out with, the beliefs that aren't leading to your greatest good, and all of the above.
So for people listening who don't really understand the metaphor of the shattered mirror, so what is the shattered mirror, right? Like, are we born with these issues? Is this programmed into us? And can we talk about maybe some practical examples of exactly what kind of, I guess, thought patterns we're speaking about, and what kind of programs are running that we're potentially not even aware of?
Yeah. I think it's a dual nature, right? I believe whether you want to look at this from an Eastern philosophy and call it karma, or you want to look at this from a Western scientific lens and call it epigenetics. Oftentimes, I think we're using different language to speak to the exact same thing. I believe that there's an aspect that we're coming into this world with, I hesitate to use this word, but it's all it's coming through, baggage, right? Like predestined, my soul's design, I'm coming in here to learn these lessons and understand these teachings. And once I'm born, I'm thrown into a world that just wants to invest their own ideology into me, right? And I'll just use a personal example growing up, and this might ruffle some feathers, not entirely sure who your audience is, but religion. It's the shame and guilt that came from the indoctrination of Christianity. It took me a couple decades to start unwinding that programming in my mind of what it is to relate to my sexuality and my own freedom and my own discipline and hierarchical structures and how to relate to women and all of these things, right? And that's one example of programming. You can also find this in institutionalized programming, governmental programming, parental programming. I mean, it's pretty much anywhere you can look. So I think it happens both ways. We both come in with a certain level of it, and we're injected into environments where the programming is heightened in many ways throughout the life. Now, to figure out what this is, to going back to the shattered mirror example, It's all inner work, man. It's really starting to attune to and discover who you are in many levels. Like nothing has anything to do with outside of you. Nothing. This entire journey of self-discovery has to do with the self only. And we can use examples like triggers. If somebody triggers you, it has nothing to do with that person. Let's talk about it more specifically in relationship, because I don't know of a relationship out there where the partner doesn't trigger the other, right? When your partner triggers you, it has nothing to do with you. Their trigger has nothing to do with you, and your trigger has nothing to do with them. All they are doing is reflecting back a part of yourself that is not free in some way. And so we project on them it's their fault, when really they're just highlighting an aspect of myself that is trapped under some of these programs. And so some tangible practices to start building awareness around this. One of the first ones I have all my guys do is the self-shit talk journal, right? Most people aren't even aware of their thoughts, dude. And so it's like, how am I expected to create and build and find my purpose in this life if I don't even know how to relate to my own mind? Because for most people, they're trapped in the exhaustion of mental rumination, right? Mental rumination typically happens two ways. I'm stuck in the past thinking about what has happened. For a lot of people, this is depression. It's the inability to accept what is. And for a lot of people, it's having fear of a future that literally doesn't exist. And that's where anxiety comes from. And a lot of people aren't actually being with what their mind is showing them in the now, the present moment. And so the self-shit talk journal is a really powerful practice, because when you have somebody do it for a few weeks, what I'll have them do is they'll start Monday, and then Sundays are review days. And every time they see themselves or hear themselves say something negative about themselves, they just write that thing in a journal and then move on. You know, someone will cut them off in traffic and people blame themselves. Oh, you fucking idiot. I shouldn't have been driving that fast. Write that down. Or you say something, you're like, oh, that was dumb. I shouldn't have said. Write that down. And at the end of the week, go back and review and ask yourself, would you say this to your 5-year-old self? The question's always going to be no. And there's this reflection point where people start to have this realization of like, whoa, I didn't even realize I've been talking to myself this way, right? And our words are so powerful. They don't describe our reality. They are creating our reality. And so if I'm talking shit to myself all day, I'm reinforcing the belief that I am that thing. And so the first practice in any of this is start to rebuild a relationship with your mind, the things you're talking about, what you're saying. And then I'd say that the next level of that practice would be a journaling practice. You know, thoughts, I teach a lot of consciousness and mind work in my men's groups. And a lot of people, going back to the mental rumination thing, let's just talk about thoughts in general. Thoughts are not real. They're ethereal. But because we have them, and there's some sort of, by believing that because I see myself thinking that there's an interaction with them, not realizing that I am the thing doing the thought, so there is no interaction, it's all one and the same, that something's being done. And so I'll have a thought, maybe it's self-deprecating, maybe it's an idea, maybe it's a truth that needs to be spoken, maybe it's something that I know I need to stop doing in life, and then I don't do anything with that thought, so it fades away, and then that thought comes back up, and then fades away, and then thought, and then the repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat. And so when we take our mind into a journaling practice every day, something as simple as like a stream of consciousness, 15 minutes, let it flow. And like most people, you're probably going to have resistance. Have the first sentence be, I don't fucking know what to write. And then just see what happens. And then if you still don't know, write that again. And then write that again. And I promise you by the 10th one, your mind's going to start flowing. And it's about being able to alchemize what's happening in our internal landscape so we can start to understand ourselves better. And so between those two practices, I think that is the most important beginning to start understanding what is that distortion that I'm seeing in this shattered mirror.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I am a self-lasher from way back. I've always been, I'm very conscious about it now, but I've always spoken to myself, I guess, in a manner that I would never speak to anybody, not even my worst enemy. And I don't know, it's interesting looking back. I was aware of this years before I started dealing with it. And the reason there was I had a genuine fear that my edge, I guess, in business and life derived from the fact that I pushed myself so hard and the fact that I saw myself as not good enough. So there was a huge concern that if I actually started liking, let alone loving myself, I wouldn't be successful. And basically all of the material success that I had achieved would go away and I would be nothing. Yeah, I mean, I wonder how, if you could react to that, or whether that's something that you see common in the people you work with.
I mean, bro, you fucking nailed it, dude. And I think that's where so many men that are highly successful live. I would say it outweighs the men who have done it the other way, right? And that was exactly my journey. Is it's like out of almost spite for myself to prove to other people that I was good enough, which was just me trying to prove to myself I was good enough. I had to invest everything I had into making sure that on the surface I was shiny and polished and professional. You know, I had to make sure I made it into that 40 under 40 magazine. I had to make sure that I was awarded one of the top salespeople in my industry. I had to make sure that I was one of the people in the speaking panel at the conference, or I can't just be the guy in the booth, whatever it was, right? It bled into everything I did. And it was almost exhaustive in the sense of I didn't allow myself much room to live in pleasure, to
So
live in ecstatic states, to live in joy. Go ahead.
why? So why did you need to be in the 40 under 40? What do you think your motivation was at the time?
My parents got divorced when I was young. And so there's this inherent wound of abandonment, which is all rooted in self-worth, right? And so it's like to never feel the pain that I'd felt through that rift, I needed to prove to the world I was worthy enough so nobody ever left me again.
Dude,
And then
you're
so,
talking about my story. I mean, I resonate with this
yeah,
stuff
man.
so much. Yeah.
And I would say most men do, right? And like one of the most powerful things I've realized in all my men's work is, you know, we start going through these containers, and it's so funny. The first 2 weeks, it's like the group chat's not really active, and no one's really opening up. And come week 3, 4, 5 in these things, everyone's starting to open up because it's like, oh shit, we're all going through the same stuff. Like literally all of us, we're going through the same shit. You know, and I think this wound, our wound, speaks to a lot of men in this way because it's like, damn, yeah, I have been slaving my life away, and for what? For more toys? That 2 days after I buy that thing, I'm not even excited about it anymore. You know, and so there's that way of doing it, and I believe that way of success is the material world we've been ascribed into that doesn't leave that much room for joy and happiness and pleasure and blissful states and relaxation, right? Fuck, dude, a good night's sleep, for crying out loud. I was so cracked out and exhausted by working all day long. I was like so stimulated just to keep up with myself. Then there's the other side of that where I went through this journey and realized, whoa, I can have that same level of success working half that time, surrounded with much more aligned people, leaving a lot of room to do what I want in this life, travel when I want, sleep in when I want, right? And it all came from that self-realization of like, until I came back to self, back to center, back to loving myself in this, which like you pointed out, man, until we can start being with those thoughts and noticing and admitting those things that I'm struggling in this act of self, none of the rest can open up. And so I think it's absolutely possible. You just got to understand what is the wound, what's underneath the surface that's driving you towards that exhaustive behavior in the first place, chasing this material world that we all know at many levels doesn't bring us much fulfillment.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like what you said about like everybody's kind of struggling. I'm part of a group called Entrepreneurs Organization, and going into this organization, the imposter syndrome I had was fairly significant. But it's funny, like we catch up on a regular basis and you go into a room and you try to be extremely vulnerable about the issues in your life. And it doesn't take long to realize that everybody's drowning, everybody's struggling. We're all in the same boat. Um, how does shame play a part in all this?
Shame is, in my opinion, inherently the biggest wound that men suffer from. If we like boil it down to one word, right? And now shame can go by many different ways. I believe that shame is an expression of fear. I believe shame is an expression of feeling unworthy, and so there's many different tendrils in the way that shame is represented. But it ties back to how I opened this call, right? This wound of I am not enough. Because if we allow the story of shame to perpetuate, it confirms the belief that I am not enough. And so this generalized wound that I believe all men suffer from at some level, right? And just to give comparison, because it's good for people to kind of see the polarity scale sometimes. What's the feminine primary wound? Is I'm too much. And so the man is I'm not enough. The woman is I'm too much, right? And we can see how one pulls out the other. Oh, you're fucking crazy. You're a lunatic. How we blasphemize women for being too much, and how they tell us we're not enough. They emasculate us, keep us small. Those are how the power dynamics play of one over the other. And so this wound of I am not enough, the expression of that is shame. Finding all of the ways that we are shameful in our life. And for a lot of men, this is rooted in their sexuality because of religious programming. This is rooted in how identity is played out about what we believe, going back to the purpose thing, our own purpose in this life is. Because if I could bring my individualized creative expression, that there's not a single person on this entire planet who is like me, into the public sphere, I'm often shamed from a society that wants to fit everything in a box. Right? And so no wonder I just shove down what I believe my purpose and ideals are in this life to go work for a bank under fluorescent lights and in a suit for a mission I don't really care about the rest of my life. And so shame is the frequency that I think underlines most things. Shame is the frequency where all this self shit talk comes from. Shame is the thing that keeps us separate in our intimate relationships and from our partner. Shame is the reason that we can't birth our ideas in the world. You talked about imposter syndrome. That's a version of shame. If there wasn't an aspect of self that you weren't fully loving of, then you wouldn't shame that part of you and the imposter wouldn't exist. Right? And so everything has tendrils into shame. And there's a great book called Power versus Force, David Hawkins. And he has this map in there called the Scales of Consciousness. And they go and they measure the frequency of every primary human emotion. Obviously, there's 100+ emotions, but things like shame, fear, guilt, anger, rage, resentment, all the way on up into happiness, joy, pleasure, enlightenment, authenticity, and things of that nature. Shame is the absolute lowest thing they could measure. It was almost unreadable, like the density in which shame felt, the lack of energy, the lack of movement that came from the frequency of shame. It is the absolute worst vibrational thing that we can measure. Now, if you look at the opposite end of the scale, the highest vibrational thing we can measure is authenticity. And so bridging that gap and understanding where we are and moving through the emotions, authenticity is also where your design lives, where your purpose lives, where your mission lives, where your alignment lives. And any man in his purpose is a powerful man, is a man that is of service to the world, is typically a heart-centered man because they know that that's where it's emanating from. Men that are building out of shame, we live in that world. We see what that world is, right? It's extractive. It's ego-driven, right? It's materialistic. And it's decimating to people in many ways. And so that's just kind of the scale of polarity on those things. It's like, here's one aspect of what we can do, and here's the other. And I think shame is more of the dark, the fear-driven way that emanates out from most men when we're not in our purpose.
Yeah, I've recently got into Brené Brown's work, and I'm really a big fan of the idea about vulnerability being the cure for shame, and it just takes me back. I remember kind of the first time I verbalized my issues around alcohol consumption, and I just remember the emotional breakdown and the release of shame the first time I kind of spoke about that. I guess it was a personal forum. There was about 6 of us. It was in one of the entrepreneurs organisation forum, and the shame that poured out from me. But then I guess the freeing aftermath of that allowed me to speak more and more and really crystallise my thoughts, and it's got me to a point today where I'm sober and I'm able to speak about it, and I've kind of released all shame from that point of view. Yeah, so next I wanted to kind of dive into, I want to get the terminology right. You are a certified psychedelic practitioner. Is that the right wording there?
Mm-hmm.
So how do psychedelics play a part in this?
Yeah, I just want to bring in one quote on the shame thing based on your share. I think is powerful, and it's shameful stories told in safe places are where they go to die. That's how we be released in it, as we allow ourselves to be seen. And by telling that to people that can hold that space for you, it's like you felt that cathartic release. It's like the tears that flow. Like, fuck, I don't need to hold that.
The problem is most people don't have that space.
Yeah.
It's a rare thing.
Yeah. Yeah, jump into psychedelics. Anybody who's had a psychedelic experience knows that these experiences are pretty ineffable. Have you ever had one yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah. They're ineffable in many ways, right? They're nearly impossible to put into words what the experience is really like. Now, something I think is incredible is we could both take 3 grams of mushrooms, have radically different visuals and experiences and somatic releases and emotions come up. Yet both of us come out of that experience with the same sort of wisdom that's downloaded into us, right? It's pretty incredible. If I were to sum up psychedelics in one sentence, to put something that's so expansive in one sentence, is I believe that they're arbiters of truth. I think that they are a bridge of truth. And what psychedelics do in such a profound level of intelligence, they are all conscious on deep levels, right? You can kind of feel the differences. Like I believe each medicine, I consider the medicines and how they've impacted my life, are meant for very specific things. They bring to the surface what wants to be known most when it wants to be known most. And so for some people, they'll go and do an experience and relive repressed memories. I've been deep on this path for 7 years, and up until 6 months ago, I had a repressed memory of being sexually molested by a member of my church that didn't come up for 6.5 years into this work because it just wasn't time. It just wasn't ready. And I've had people 2 journeys in, that thing will come up and be presented for them, right? I believe it's bringing to the surface what wants to be known for our greatest and most rapid evolution, because that is the purpose of this life. We are meant to grow. We are meant to expand. We are meant to come into wholeness, remember our divinity, come back into community, come back into connection with the land, the earth, the stars, all of it. And so whatever is being presented in the way of us coming back to that wholeness are what psychedelics bring to the surface, putting us in an altered state in many ways, and give us a different ability to handle things that in a normal waking consciousness we're either 1, not aware of, or 2, we're not equipped to be able to handle, right? My process of becoming a certified guide, I went to this school in Amsterdam. It was a 15-month program, 9 months of clinical study, and then 6 months of more practicum, so hands-on experience, learning from the indigenous tribes that have been using these medicines for thousands of years. And really getting into the roots at different retreats and centers there. And so I took that experience. I did a 3-year apprenticeship with my teacher I worked with when I first found this path. And now I hold space for others who are looking to find something new, man. It's like I tried the pharmaceuticals. I was addicted to damn near every single one of them over a 16-year period. Valium, Xanax, Viagra, Cialis, opioids, sleep medications, Adderall, you name it, right? Every single one of those, quote, medicines, but I believe are drugs, destroyed my life in some sort of way. Whereas psychedelics have brought me a level of expansiveness into my life. They have opened up my capacity to experience life, to feel life, and to really live a life that felt much more aligned with who I believe myself to be.
Okay, so for anybody listening to this conversation and they feel, I guess, a draw towards what you're saying, what are kind of the steps they can take? Should they just go out and get some random compound of psychedelics and give it a go, or is there a better way to go about it? What's the journey from hearing this to, I guess, self-discovery through psychedelics?
Yeah, I mean, a trusted source is everything, right? And one of the things that's been echoed for decades now is this idea of set and setting, right? What's your mindset and what's the setting in which you're taking these things in? I would not recommend taking 1.5 grams of mushrooms and being in an environment where there's a shit ton of people drinking. That's not the vibe, right? If you want to use these things intentionally for your growth, for the evolution of your consciousness, for the reconnection to yourself, as a spiritual practice, however you want to use these, make sure you're doing it in an intentional way. I've had very bad experiences doing these things in a public setting at a concert with thousands of people. That's not the way I should have done it, and I got to learn that early on. I'm not one to say that I'm not a fan of recreational use. I think that there's an intelligence and a consciousness to these medicines that, again, bring people exactly what they need when they use it. So if you want to use these in recreational settings as well, go for it. If you want to use these in the most intentional way to build a relationship with what these practices are, I believe the best place to start is with microdosing, right? Most people aren't used to, other than maybe cannabis or alcohol or what pharmaceuticals can do as well. Most people aren't used to altered states of consciousness. And our ego, which lives in the default mode network of our brain, out of benevolence, out of just wanting to keep us safe, has a strong grip on making sure that I stay exactly how I'm staying in life. But staying that way is what's also leading to your suffering, most likely, right? It's that resistance to change in life. And so if you're being called to this practice, if you're being called to these medicines, whether it's LSD, mushrooms, ayahuasca, bufo, iboga, I mean, there's a lot that is coming into the zeitgeist internationally at this point. Especially in Australia, they have MDMA and psilocybin scripts they can write. There's over 400 governmental studies in the United States. There's 18 states who have funded millions of dollars in research. There's multiple countries where it's legalized in Europe. Like it is in the zeitgeist more than it ever has been. But there's no need for you to jump straight to ayahuasca. You don't need to say, I'm interested, and then go spend 2 weeks down in the jungle of Peru, right? It's not necessary. I would say starting with something like a microdosing practice, where there's a protocol, where you don't take it every day. Maybe it's every other day for a month. So you can start to notice the subtleties of what this brings to your life. The enhanced state of presence, the enhanced state of awareness, right? The quieting of the monkey mind, of that mental rumination to be with what actually is. I believe psychedelics are the most potent and powerful tool we have to meet our distorted self from the position of the remembered self. And what psychedelics do is that gap between those versions of ourself is where the arbitration happens that I was talking about. That is the truth.
Sorry, we start to see ourselves. Can you just break down that last sentence, the remembered self and the distorted self?
Yeah, so going back to the shattered mirror principle, right? Like the remembered self is everything you desire and want in this life. Your joy, your happiness, your expansiveness, your pleasure, the relationship you want, the business you want to build, what my purpose is for this life, how I want to be of service, the most open-hearted expression of myself. That's the remembered self. It already exists in the now. But due to those beliefs and programs and everything, most of us are looking at the life through the lens of the distorted self. And so the picture of the shattered mirror is you literally are the entire whole being, but you're seeing yourself through the shattered mirror that isn't actually you. And so you can kind of piece yourself together through that thing, but it's not actually you. Psychedelics bridge that gap. It helps us come back to the remembered self, which brings awareness to the beliefs, the distortions, the traumas, the patterns, and the programming that have been running the show in the background of your conscious or unconscious mind. They are the reason that you feel you need to distract or numb from life. They are the reason that leads to the addictions. Bro, I believe that 100% of people that are addicts are just in pain. That's it. They're just trying to numb from the pain that is so unbearable to be with in a sober state. Right? And so when we incorporate psychedelics into our life in a meaningful and intentional and safe way, we get to start looking at and being with those aspects of self that are causing the discomfort, that are causing the pain, so we can build a relationship with that part of myself. So we can build a relationship with that discomfort and start to learn from it. Because when we start to attune our awareness to everything happening in my life is happening for me, nothing is happening to me, and I change my relationship with that thing to understand that this is happening because it wants to teach me something, then I'm no longer a victim to life, right? And when we participate with psychedelics, it puts that frame on where you start to look at everything happening as perfect, especially with a microdose practice. Microdosing is meant to be something you incorporate into your normal waking state, in my normal life, because it brings that enhanced state of presence and attunement into how I'm already living my life. So I notice my thoughts more. I notice the emotions that I'm avoiding. I can feel the environments that I know aren't good for me, and I need to start eliminating those things in my life. I notice my emotional reactivity before it even happens. One of my friends talked about microdosing as like the scene in the Matrix when Neo has all those bullets flying after him. And there's that second of pause where he can grab the bullet out of the air. That's what microdosing does. It gives us that pause to interact with life from just a brief bit of stillness, where in that bit of stillness between the reaction that most people are living in, most of us are in a reactionary triggered state constantly, we get to take that moment and pause and just look at our life from a different lens. And so I think microdosing is the most powerful way to incorporate these medicines in your life. Not everybody needs to go and do 3 grams of mushrooms off the bat. Right? Now, if you get benefit from that practice, then you can start asking questions. There's so many websites now where you can get vetted guides who have reviews. There's retreat centers all around the world for deeper experiences, but it's pretty easy to start a microdosing practice at home by yourself.
So it sounds like what you're describing is, I guess, an extreme or high level of mindfulness, like something regular listeners would have heard me speak about is between stimulus and response, there is a gap. And meditation and mindfulness for me is about finding that gap rather than being dragged by reaction. And it sounds like what you're getting towards is microdosing assists you with mindfulness and being able to find that gap. Is that a reasonable, summary of how you would put it?
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, I've really appreciated my meditation practice because it's helped me build a relationship with what I call the observer. And that's not original. A lot of meditative practices call it the observer, right? But really setting back into the seat where I can just notice life happening. Right? And a lot of times it's difficult to carry that into the real world when I'm in the chaos of my work environment and traffic and a grocery store, right? I live in Austin, Texas. So it's a city of over 1.5 million people. There's a lot going on at all times. When I incorporate these medicines in those environments, it almost brings that state I'm attuning into, that state I'm practicing in my meditative practice, into the real world experience. And so I believe they pair off of each other very well. They're teaching us much of the same things. A lot of the Eastern traditions, especially with a lot of the Taoist meditative traditions, they describe meditative states that they get to that are very psychedelic in nature. And so I believe all of this work is just working on our consciousness in a way that's bringing us more into alignment of what it means to be in radical presence. Because from that place, whether it's a meditative, a breath work, or a psychedelic practice that you have, from that place you're able to have a different relationship with life as a whole. And I appreciate that stimulus response example there. It's like in that gap is where we have choice. And when we can be more aware and present and conscious to those choices we're making, we're directing the entirety of our lives.
So I wanted to dive into, I guess, microdosing from a practical level. Does does the compound matter? Does the frequency matter? Does the dosage matter? Is there any right or wrong way to do these things?
Yes and yes. Yes, there's a right way, and yes, there's a wrong way, and no, right? It's such an individualized experience. Um, I can just talk from my lens. So I do have a um, microdosing community here in the US where we do provide microdoses for people. We consider this a spiritual practice, and so we are lawfully protected under our spiritual freedoms, First Amendment constitutional rights. We're a private member association, and so we provide these sacraments to people to have this practice in their life. And the way we talk about it, because you're going to have differing opinions out there, is it's not meant to be something you do every day. And so you follow what's called a protocol. And anybody who's heard of microdosing knows that protocols are very well known. But the type of protocol I believe is hyper independent. What's going to work with your life? What's something you can incorporate into your life where you can start to notice the benefits of this? Microdosing is about the subtleties. It's about really calling you into deeper levels of presence, attunement, and awareness to how you're living your life, the thoughts you're having, and how you interact to everything. Now, the dosing, I believe that mushrooms are the best type of microdose out there, given the well-rounded nature of what they bring. The other microdosing that's most common is probably LSD, but it's so heady to me. It's so like mental and creative focus that it doesn't really show me the expansive ways that I want to meet myself. And so for a microdose, an average dose might be 75 milligrams to 250 milligrams. So you're looking at 1/30th to 1/50th of a trip dose, right? It's truly a microdose. And so for me, an example protocol I would use is I like to do something every other day for maybe a month, and then I'll take 2 to 4 weeks off to really integrate that experience. I journal with it every day. I ask myself questions. I get really attuned to noticing how my emotions change from one day to the next. And so I like the every other day approach because I can compare side by side, right? It's very regimented, it's scheduled. And by doing it every other day, I'm avoiding tolerance. So I'm not avoiding buildup to where I have to take more of it. And the entire thing is about learning from the experience to incorporate those teachings in my life so I don't need this indefinitely, right? One of the taglines, I guess you could call it, we have is descriptive, not prescriptive. These things aren't meant to prescribe the way you live your life. They're meant to build a relationship with self, so you're describing the way you live your life. And so it's that learning from these experiences as you go. So I believe mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms, are the best microdosing practice out there because of the well-rounded approach that they bring. As long as you do on any protocol, some do a week on, a week off. There's like 3 days on, 2 days off. There's so many out there that you can find in research. Just make sure you're following some sort of protocol. And then the dosing should be something that is functional, but it's bringing you to a sub-perceptual state. And so I can still actively engage into my life. I can work, I can drive, I can parent, I can go to school. But I'm also slightly attuned and noticing of the differences in the way my mind works, my thoughts work, how I relate to life, how I communicate differently. Does my cadence slow down? Am I less reactive? Right? And so the practice is about the subtleties. And then just one final explanation, because I've been telling this to some of my students lately, and they said it's really resonated. I believe that the practice of microdosing is meant to reconnect us with our mind, our body, and our soul. The mind represents our thoughts, our patterns, our distortions, our belief systems, our programming, right? And so when we take that brief separation from those things in the practice, you start to be much more noticing of all those aspects of the self and how they show up. The body being the somatic experience, the emotional experience, and nervous system regulation. Mushrooms are really beautiful at helping us regulate our nervous systems as well, with all the science that's coming out with what they do in the brain, what they do for the cells, glutamate and GABA regulation, quieting of the default mode network. It's really beautiful, but all the aspects it has on the body, and then the soul, which I just believe is the now, The soul is the ever-present moment, the only thing that ever exists and ever will exist. And so this practice is about bringing us back into alignment of those three aspects of self.
So you spoke a few times about, learning, trying to learn from this practice. What do you mean by learning? What are we trying to learn? Is it around learning who your authentic self is?
Yes, and I believe the teachings are what's bringing you to the authentic self. So one of the teachings I have this thing called the path of conscious creation, which has these 4 pillars called truth, desire, catalyst, and wisdom. And the catalyst pillar is about how to relate to every single fucking thing that's happening in your life. Like everything. The leaf that just fell off this oak tree out there is in some way, somehow a catalyst for me. Everything that happens to us in life is trying to teach us something. Everything. And for people that get stuck in these loops, like, I'll use relationships because this is always the easy one that people can relate to, right? You attract the same partner over and over. You're attracting that same partner over and over again because you are being delivered a teaching, a lesson that you were meant to learn for you to evolve closer into that authentic version of yourself. And the reason it keeps showing up the same is you're refusing to actually learn from it. And so I keep getting cheated on in my relationships. Well, have you learned the lesson that you're not sitting in your self-worth and you're ignoring the signs and signals of what it means to get cheated on, so you keep attracting the same woman so she can prove to yourself the story you're telling yourself? Probably. And so when I start to notice that and actually receive the lesson I'm learning, the next time that signal of that woman shows up, I can be like, actually, no, this isn't meant for me. I know what this feels like. I'm going to go a different direction. Once that lesson is learned, that thing's not going to show up again. And so it's about starting to understand that we are creating everything that happens to us in life. My soul is creating my entire life experience. It has nothing to do with my external environment. Because the second I give away my power to something outside of myself, I've become a victim. Oh, that's happening because of that. Oh, you did the government that you just gave your power away. You just created your own victimization in that. And so it's coming back to, I am creating every event, circumstance, conversation, and hardship in my entire life. And every single thing I'm creating is trying to teach me something. And when I look at life through that lens, I can start to take on the hardships, and instead of getting lost in it, be like, okay, this is what it feels like right now. What is this thing trying to teach me? And when we relate to life in that way, you evolve in rapid time. Because once you learn the lesson, it doesn't need to show up again. And so that's what I mean by that framework, is everything that happens in this life is trying to teach me something. Everything, without fail. And that perspective has helped me integrate the ways that I was being a victim to everything in my life, especially in relationship. And the more we can integrate that victim, the more I am in my power, the more I am in my authentic expression. Right? And this just goes back to how we started this. That's how we start clearing these distortions that are preventing us from being in alignment with who we really are.
Yeah, there's an idea in Buddhism that we're constantly stuck in these cycles, right? And we can't exit these cycles until we evolve, and then we just evolve into the next cycle. And it sounds like potentially
samsara. Yeah.
Yeah. And what psychedelics are doing is helping us evolve into that next cycle, right?
Yeah.
There's another saying that I found on some of your material, but I was already very, very familiar with it, and it really resonates with me, from Michael Pollan. The psychedelic experience is like fresh snowfall, filling in the grooves, allowing you to take any path you want. What does that mean?
Yeah, he, in I think his second book, How to Change Your Mind, or This Is Your Mind on Plants, he talks about, imagine that you're a snowboarder and you go to the top of the mountain, and the mountain hasn't been gone down at all, and you take that first path down, and you get to the lift and you come back to the top. Well, when you follow that same path down, it feels pretty easy. Then you come to the top, and then you go down that same path a third time, and that groove starts to get really deep, starts to get really ingrained. That is a mental imagery of our thoughts, our behaviors, our patterns. of the way the mind operates. And every time we engage in a behavior, a thought, or a pattern, it's building these things called neural pathways in our brain. And the more that we find ourselves repeating that thing, the more ingrained that neural pathway gets. And the ones that present differing options and opinions start to die away because they're not being used. And so this is why when we engage in patterns and behaviors for some of us decades, feeling like we can change feels impossible. It's like, I know I want to do something different. Why am I not doing something different? Why does it feel so hard? And then we guilt and shame ourselves for it, which reaffirms the belief in the first place. And then it makes it even harder to escape that. And so what psychedelics do, it's like bringing fresh snow onto that mountain. And so after I went down it 3 or 4 times, it may be ingrained, but now with the fresh thing of snow, I can choose a different way. And so the science of psychedelics, neuroplasticity, right? It's the easement of creating new neural pathways in the brain. It's putting your brain in a plastic state to make it literally easier to engage in new thoughts, behaviors, and patterns, right? Like that's a literal miracle. And so for people that have trouble eating better, exercising more, making better decisions, when you incorporate psychedelics in your life, it quite literally makes you doing those things easier outside of the experience. And then there's something like neurogenesis. It's the regrowth of new neurons in the brain. Neuroplasticity can't happen without neurons. And then there's BDNF release, brain-derived neurotropic factor. It's like miracle grow for the brain. They're now showing that it increases the cellular length of cells within brain activity. So what Paulin is showing there is that this psychedelic experience, it puts fresh snow inside your mind. And from that place of freshness, by engaging in new thoughts, behaviors, in patterns, we can change our life in such a rapid way that we didn't even think was possible 2 decades ago.
Awesome. I did a retreat at the start of this year. And I guess one of my learnings coming out of my retreat, and it was... So basically, I was on antidepressants for years. I started... So in my business, in the early stages of my business, I was working, 80 plus hours a week. I didn't know what I was doing. Extremely stressed out. And all of a sudden started getting panic attacks. So I got on antidepressants, and I couldn't get off them. I tried to wean myself off them for years. Anyway, I forcefully weaned myself off them for this retreat. It was extremely difficult. And one of my learnings that I got out of it was, I think through therapy and I guess alcoholism and stuff like that, I inherently saw myself as broken. I just thought I was a broken person. And after one of the ceremonies, I don't even know how to describe this in words, right? But I felt like I was being told, you're not broken anymore. You can move on from that thought pattern. And anyway, obviously there was a few other things that happened in that retreat, but since that, I've effortlessly, obviously, got off them. And obviously that's an anecdotal story, but yeah, it was a powerful one. It just basically, I felt like there was some rewiring or something happening there, that I've gone from seeing myself as a broken and damaged goods person, I guess. And anyway, that's just an experience I had.
Yeah, I mean, there's millions of those, man.
Yeah, it's crazy.
The stories that are coming to the zeitgeist now, and I've had many of my own like that too. Where it's like I come out of this, I used to suffer from really bad social anxiety, which led to a lot of the drinking. It's like I wanted to be social, but I'd get those environments and then I'd be freaking the fuck out because I had all this social anxiety. And so a few beers in, I'd be like, okay, but then here I am out drinking for 12 hours. It always only goes one way. And I remember I did this bufo medicine once. It's known as probably the most powerful psychedelic. It's only about a 15, 20-minute experience. And They call it the God molecule, the DMT molecule. You get blasted off into an ether, and 20 minutes later, you're back in your body, stone sober, like nothing happened. And I go through this experience, and I remember coming out of it, and the first thing I said to my buddies in the room was like, I've cared about what people have thought my whole life. And they're like, really? And, because I'm the fun, playful guy when we're out, but only when I was drunk. And ever since that ceremony, it's like I saw that part of myself, and it helped me move through it in some way. I just didn't give a shit after that. Something in me just snapped and was different from that 20-minute experience where I came out and I'm like, why do I care what people think about me? And I think this is the ineffable part. It's like you can't point to something specific that happened, but you just felt that way all of a sudden. And that's the only way I can explain it too. And yeah, I think in a paradigm of science, we think we need to explain everything so articulately, or there's no validation to it. But I don't know how you explain that in a way that could fit the paradigm we live in, yet it's the most valid thing I've ever gone through.
So that kind of leads me into my next question. I mean, you mentioned in a lot of your materials something, I guess, what you're trying to achieve with men in the healing process is dissolving limiting beliefs. What is a limiting belief, and what do you mean by trying to dissolve them?
I'll use money as an example because this is one that comes up a lot, right? And so men have a difficulty with abundance, holding abundance, attracting abundance, making more money. And for a lot of men, there's a limiting belief about what their worthiness of holding and having that abundance is, right? Or there's a scarcity mindset. Maybe they grew up in a household. This was a big story for me. I would remember growing up that I would go in before we'd enter a grocery store. Say we're going to Target or something growing up. My mom, right before we got into the front doors, she'd look at us kids and says, if you ask us for anything, you're grounded, right? And so there's this belief ingrained in my mind at a very young age that money is scarce, I can't want anything, and I should feel bad for wanting anything. And so here I am growing up throughout my life, and as I started to make my own money, every time I bought something, I would feel something about that. Like, fuck, should I have this? Should I take it back? I don't want this. I'd have that like buyer's remorse because I had this limiting belief that I was meant to live in scarcity. And so because I had that limiting belief about scarcity, even though when I was making a shit ton of money, I never had any money to show for it. Because I had this belief that I wasn't an abundant individual, I would make sure to spend as quickly as I made. And so it didn't matter how much I made, I figured out a way to prove to myself this limiting belief I had by finding ways to confirm that belief, which in that version of myself is going out and spending money on stupid shit, toys, dinners, drinks, whatever it might be. Another limiting belief is that maybe, and this is where my religious programming came in, I'm not worth my pleasure. I'm going to get sent to hell if I have thoughts of a woman, right? If I even think a woman's beautiful, and now I'm committing adultery, I'm going to get sent to hell. And I remember when, there was some stuff that happened when we were 12, and my mom caught my brothers and I watching porn, and none of us knew that there was a history bar that existed on the internet back then. And when she sat down and talked to us, one of the first things that came out of her mouth is, you know what the church says about this. And so one of my beliefs that was instilled in me at the age of 12 is, if I find a woman beautiful, I'm going to go to hell. And so now I had this limiting belief carrying out the rest of my life that was actually preventing me from having the level of intimacy and erotic relationship with my partner that I sought. Right? And so limiting beliefs can often be found in, if you desire something in life, but don't feel like you're able to have what you desire, what's in the way of that is some sort of limiting belief. And the first thing I take guys through with this practice, this is that second pillar I was talking about, truth, desire, is we do this desire exercise where you go through, and over the course of 6 pages in your journal, I want you to write your desired life. And every single time that you write something and you feel guilt, shame, you notice yourself use words that aren't actually aligned with what you really want, you notice yourself playing small, just put a little check or a star or an asterisk next to that sentence. because the visceral felt somatic experience that is presenting the challenge of admitting that you want that thing in the first place is where your limiting beliefs live, right? And this is why a lot of people, especially in the money game, like we're seeing this divide get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's because a lot of people don't think they're worth having money in their life. So they're going to go find reasons why. They're going to go find reasons that they're a victim in life to prove themselves in the limiting belief that they're not worthy of that. And we could take this into any area of your life. And so again, the quickest way to find that is start to actually write out in more detail than you thought possible what it is that you want for your life, and then notice what you feel when you're doing it. And that's a really beautiful trigger to start bringing a spotlight to what some of those beliefs are.
So what are you working on now?
Yeah, man, I'm really excited about my virtual men's group I'm launching. I've been doing men's work for 4 years, mostly in one-on-one containers. Just this year, I started getting into small group cohorts, so 10 guys, 10 weeks, where each week is a mixture of like teachings and sharings, and I just kept going back to. I've been a part of maybe a half dozen men's groups over the last couple of years, and I always felt. Typically, I'd pay $100 to $300 a month. We'd have 3 to 4 calls a month, anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours. Maybe there's a chat outside and one event, something like that, right? And I'd always get off these calls feeling like something was lacking. I'd always feel like, okay, that was great. We had a place to share vulnerability that was safe. That's powerful. Maybe do some breakout room intimacy practices. Maybe they'd bring in something like, okay. And yet I'd get off this call and I'm like, how is this actually helping me build my life, my relationship, my business, my vision, helping me find my purpose, whatever it is? And so from the place of understanding the value of men's work, of creating containers for men, also understanding that there's a next level in which men can show up and be supportive for each other. And so I'm launching in August something I'm calling the Coliseum. It's on the school app. And it's a virtual community for men to show up in devotion to themselves. And in turn, the community will help each other birth whatever we want in this life. And so there's going to be cannabis ceremonies. That was a plant I've used for many years. I think it's the most abused plant medicine on the planet. And it's the most potent if used properly. And so I'm going to be leading these cannabis for creativity calls, teaching people how to use this plant medicine appropriately, effectively to birth ideas in this life. There's going to be 4 men's group calls. I'm going to be doing master classes. There's going to be 4 morning calls, devotional spaces for men to show up collectively to start building that dream life. And so it's like, if a man doesn't show up in devotion himself, he's not going to build anything he wants in this life. He's not going to have the sex life he wants, the relationship, the business, the abundance, nothing. And so it all starts with how deeply can you meet yourself daily. And so there's going to be space in the morning for that. And it's going to be this container about helping men really hone what their purpose, vision, and mission is in this life. Because when a man can articulate those 3 things with such a level of specificity that they feel in their heart, they're unfuckable with. There's nothing that will be able to stop them from bringing that idea, that business, that thing to life. Part of the community is every 2 months we have giveaways where I take 20% of the money that the community brings in from the monthly cost, and we give that back to somebody in the community. And so for a lot of men, it's scary leaving the corporate world. It's scary leaving this job you've been at for 10 years, but you also know that thing is rotting your soul away. And so now, by giving funds back to the community, we're going to have contests every 2 months where you're going to have an opportunity in 5 minutes or less to pitch your purpose, mission, and vision for the world. How is it being of service to something greater than you? And then we're going to give you the startup funds to bring that thing to life. And then in co-creation, when we bring hundreds of men together that allow themselves to be seen, that show up in devotion for themselves, and use our shared resources and potential, there's no chance that we can fail. And so this is what I believe the future of men's work is going to be. It's like, yes, we're showing up to do the vulnerable and the intimate work, and let me help you bring your dream to life, bro. Let me help you find the investor, the funding, the marketing experts. Let me help you with the distribution, because that is my expertise. And so building a community of men to show up where I will mirror the level of devotion you have to yourself. And from that place, none of us will fail.
Austin, you're awesome, man. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, brother. Yeah, it's good to be on, man. Appreciate you having me.